And to be able to do things that perhaps in mid-60s.
The more it becomes mass market, the more important.
I have been asked many times as we approach 2010 why we would celebrate our 45th anniversary, because most people and most companies don't celebrate 45 years. We celebrate 40 and then we celebrate 50, but stopping to celebrate at 45 seems a bit odd to many people. We weren't so much celebrating the 45th year as we were celebrating SAGE and celebrating SAGE's impact on the social sciences, celebrating the social sciences themselves and the good work that SAGE had done. And that's why we chose to commemorate this year. And so it was more about the way SAGE had changed academia and the ways in which SAGE had made a difference. And in thinking about how we started this year and how we really celebrated all of those things with SAGE and for SAGE, I started to think about all of the anecdotes I had heard over the years from authors who had been with SAGE for 30 or 40 years, authors and journal editors who felt they had been discovered by Sara and George. And there were fantastic stories. An author who said, I was a graduate student and Sara and George took me out to dinner at a convention and they believed in me. Or an author who speaks about Sara and George insisting that he or she go to the cabin in Yosemite where Sara and George encouraged them to write a manuscript. Sara and George were willing to take risks on new people, young scholars, and new ideas. And so what we tried to do was assemble a panel of authors and editors who had either been discovered by SAGE or they discovered SAGE earlier in their career. It started out to be what we thought was a good idea. And we had a lot of fun putting together the panel of authors and editors. It turned out to be an absolutely transformational moment for all of us who were there that day, and I think for SAGE for the future.
SAGE and Sara and George reached out to young people, encouraged young people, published their first work, and all of them ended up with fields that they stayed in for years and now are institutionalized because, and I put on my deanly cap here, because there are legitimate scholarly forums that we consider to be the best in those fields. And people get tenure, people get promoted on the basis of that, and public policymakers look to that research because it is quality research.
It's a company that is very much the extended shadow of one person who has an uncommon capacity both to demand excellence and to collaborate with those who deliver excellence for her. Very unusual company.
They decided to go into the field of education. And one of the things that's important about the company is we have always, without fail, stuck to that mission.
I don't think there was anybody anywhere who understood methodological diversity and eclecticism the way that Sara and George did, and actually had a vision of the entire methodological panorama. We were all in our narrow boxes and arguing our own methods and procedures, and I don't think anybody had the big picture the way that they did, knew where the gaps were, knew where the directions were, knew what needed to be done, and again, willing to do the cutting edge and beyond.
We owed it to our authors and our editors to grow the company, to be able to do more each year, to be able to do it better, and to be able to do things that perhaps in the mid-60s were viewed as a little risky, including interdisciplinary publishing.
That's a part of the visionary aspect of Sara and SAGE, and that the SAGE imprimatur, if you will, is that keen insight into what is coming next.
We tended to look at disciplines and building lists in companionship with the growth and emergence of different fields, and in particular, those fields that were interdisciplinary, where there were people who very much saw the cutting edge and wanted to get beyond it, where there was a real possibility of turning that knowledge towards the solution of social problems, towards a better understanding of social issues. Those were always things that motivated us.
It was SAGE that really made the research, the sustained analytical discourse about African and African American phenomena legitimate as a social science and an interdisciplinary field.
The strength of SAGE as a home for authors is that you are not putting your work into the machine.
Marv was encouraging me that the book would have more legitimacy for academics if I wrote in the third person passive, and so I called Sara and I said, you know, what do you think about I'm writing in the first person? And she said, you write in the voice that you want to write in. That's not going to be an issue for us in publishing the book. That was extraordinary. That didn't happen back then. And it's a sense of how she understood both the person, and I felt tremendously supported, and also took a risk because that was going against the academic grain. It's another way of going against the academic grain, to publish something that had that tone, that non-academic tone, while also establishing academic legitimacy. A very fine line to walk, and they did it beautifully and with great effect.
There was such a charisma of risk-taking that she had that was so incredible that she was a visionary in the sense of being able to see the value of this.
You have to have a vision, and I think Sara Miller McCune had a vision. She wanted to have a press that would produce the kinds of books and journals that would really meet the needs, primarily, initially, of the social sciences.
When I was starting out in the field, communication researchers were never at those tables, but they are at those tables in Washington when you talk about food marketing policy, and when you talk about childhood obesity, and when you talk about violence. And so many of the publications that helped scholars address those questions and to put them in the public arena have come out of SAGE publications. And you really see that when you look at the field of communication today, how much broader the range of questions are that are being addressed.
SAGE has always moved forward. It has never stayed static.
SAGE has not just transformed the academy, but made a real impact on society.
A lot of people think impression and impact are the same thing, but there are a lot of people, a lot of companies that can make an impression, but very few that make an impact. And I think SAGE is a company that makes an impact.
Imagining of the concept of SAGE and then the perfection of it over the years in which she's worked on it, that's got to be one of the most monumental accomplishments in the corporate world in our lifetime. Quietly, competently, focused, and always in the end building excellence in the product. And doing it by allowing excellent people to do what they do best.
It really was a remarkable afternoon. One of my favorite stories was Michael Quinn Patton telling how Sara boarded a plane one morning at Los Angeles, flew to Minnesota to sit with him and his wife at a kitchen table and to explain to his wife why he needed to write this book for SAGE. My favorite moment was probably Molefi Asante, who is also a good friend of mine, who describes being a new PhD from UCLA, driving to Beverly Hills, in his words, to meet with this young Jewish woman to publish the Journal of Black Studies because no one else would take a risk and publish that journal. And I love the story from David Goldfield, who talks about conceiving the idea for a new journal in urban history at a bar in Florida called Coconut Joe's. What we realized that afternoon is that what makes SAGE special, and what made it special and unique, is that Sara and George were willing to take risks. They were willing to create new academic disciplines, and they were willing to discover a new generation of scholars. Sara has given us the gift of perpetuity, and I think we have to reciprocate. We now have to be the ones who take risks and create new disciplines and discover that next generation of scholars. And if we do that, I am certain that SAGE will flourish for decades to come.